What's up, fuck boys?
This is Slashers, a podcast about movies and more for those who love horror. My name is Jake, and with me, as for the first time in a long time, is my esteemed colleague, co-host, and cohort, Brian. Brian, say hello to the mutant goons from beyond.
Hey, what's going on, guys? Did you miss me?
No, resoundingly no. Who are you? It's been ages.
It has been ages. Yeah, I've actually just been studying abroad, checking out the different locales for Hammer that I'm going to be checking you guys out. That makes no fucking sense. I'm going to be delving into, I guess, Hammer Productions. So
you were backpacking through Europe?
Yeah, I went to Europe and did all that stuff. So it was great. No, fuck no. I was stuck in the mountains because it was
The fun part
burning.
is you would go to two different places. Like, I think that they shot 2 films on location and the rest were all in England at Bray Studios or nearby.
Yeah, probably.
So
yeah.
that'd be the shittiest backpacking trip ever. You'd be like, hey, wait, what? I just go across the street? Oh, okay.
And we're done.
Sick. All right.
All right.
I still have 17 days of vacation left.
Isn't it funny, though, how, like, at least for me, I think when I hear other people from Europe who say, oh, I've been to multiple countries, over there, it's like going to different states.
For sure.
Whereas here, we're like, oh my God, your passport must look amazing and exotic. They're like, nah, dude, I traveled like 4 hours and I went to 3 different countries.
On a public transit, no less.
Yeah.
Oh, also, Chad's here.
Hey guys. Hi.
No, it's enough chat. This is the Brian Show.
Yeah. This is a podcast about movies and more. And so here is an episode that is movies and more.
This is all about the more, definitely.
This is Hammer Films, motherfuckers.
That's right. Absolutely.
Now, we did a poll with our Patreon patrons and asked them what would they like to hear. And this is the one that by far and large. So I had 2 of the ones that I wanted were either a biography on the Misfits or this one. And since then, the Misfits have announced more tour dates. So their saga is not actually over. So in good conscience, I wouldn't even want to do it. And this
so
one
basically what you're saying is no pressure, Brian. Everybody wants to hear this episode. Don't fuck up.
Even
actually,
me,
they're
I
judging
went
you
in,
right now. Yeah.
I went in and actually downvoted Misfits.
Yeah.
What the fuck? I was wondering how that happened. Negative 17% vote. What the fuck? So, Brian, shall you take us away?
Yeah, man. Let's get started.
So what research articles or whatever did you use? Because I want to make sure that we are doing some kind of bibliographical reference at the beginning. Because I think I read excerpts from like 20 books using Google Books and a couple other things. But the main one that I read was Real Terror, the scary, bloody, gory 100 years of classic horror films.
I actually went a lot of the information just came directly from the Hammer's website.
Yeah, it's really
the
good.
The historical page basically on everything Hammer.
It's a very good chronology.
Yeah, exactly. So
it's actually better, or at least more clearly set out than like Wikipedia's.
Right, even though I've done a lot of Wikipedia stuff too. But
well, it's actually very good.
Bad.
Well, because the stuff that I read from Real Terror, I saw paraphrased or at least summarized in the Wikipedia.
Right, absolutely.
And then I think Chad and I both watched the Hammer, the Studio That Dripped Blood, and then I watched the Flesh and Blood documentary that's available for free on Tubi. It's delightful. There's titties.
They're not paying us to say that.
They're not. I keep trying to get their attention. They like all of my posts, but then they don't do anything about it. I'm like, excuse me. Nobody rides for free, bitches.
That's right.
So, Ryan?
Yeah, let's take it away. Basically, the way it started was from a guy named William Hinds. Not Heinz ketchup, Hind, nuts. He was originally a jeweler in London with his brother Frank. And they split up after he kind of went off and did his own thing. Like they established success. And he's like, you know what? Fuck jewelry. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to delve into other things. I want to do theater. Yeah. And his brother's like, yeah, well, I'm going to actually keep this real job. So no, just kidding. You can totally be a theater actor.
No, he sucked.
No, he really did.
Yeah, his son Anthony was like, he was a failed comedian because he wasn't funny.
Right,
yes.
right.
The funniest shit.
Right. I mean, and this all leads up to his ultimate, like, untimely death. Yeah. I mean, we'll get to that a little bit later, but that's almost comical as well.
Yeah. And so Hammer comes from Hinds not because of like any alliteration or anything. It's because it's Hammersmith.
It's from the location of
and
where
so
it was from.
Hammer and Smith was the vaudeville act. And then he just presented himself as Hammer.
Right, exactly. So William, he became increasingly involved in the theater groups. He ended up owning a bunch of different venues throughout town, the local venues, which is kind of neat. I guess just supporting local actors, right? I mean, which I feel like you should always do.
Absolutely. Which leads him into film distributorship because he'd done theater distributorship.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And that's what kind of ultimately led him to meet up with Carreras.
Yeah.
Yeah, Carrera. He didn't just go straight to owning theaters. He actually ended up purchasing cinemas as well. And that's what led him to meet up eventually with the Carreras.
Perfect.
Okay.
And the Carreras essentially between those two guys ended up creating
Everything.
basically everything, but they had the separate company that owned all the
exclusive films.
exclusive films.
Yeah.
Right. And then
Kind of funny, right? They own
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
exclusively owned this and their exclusive films.
So World War II happens. So if I'm not mistaken, not to overstep on you.
No, yeah, go for it.
November 5th, 1934 is when Hammer launches. And it's at that point, distributorship. Then World War II happens. And suddenly you have your entire workforce going off to war. When by the time they come back in 1937, Hammer declares bankruptcy, but exclusive film remains. So exclusive was the offshoot of Hammer, then was
Right.
the more proficient business model. Then Hammer was a subsidiary in 1947. So a 10-year gap.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a 10-year gap in that time span. I believe Hinds, if I'm not mistaken, Hinds continues with his theatrical acts and his comedy acts, which are awful. And that's when he actually has his untimely motorcycle accident.
Yeah.
So within those 10 years, Carrera continues making films, and actually Carrera and the son of William, I believe it's Anthony, they both meet up and he kind of convinces Anthony to come back and join in, and they both recreate Hammer.
Exactly.
Hammer time.
And it's interesting because the Carreras family, there is strife like you wouldn't believe. Father's not talking to son. So there's 3 generations involved. And one's a businessman, one's a salesman, and there's strife. It's almost lucky for Hinds that his dad died because he was very much a creative force through all of Hammer, even though he was almost reluctantly brought into that element. But it seems like most people were kind of reluctantly like, oh, I'm just here for the paycheck. And suddenly they're like directing and producing. And they're like, wait, I'm sorry, what happened?
Here you go. Run with it.
Yeah. Don't ever waste your time looking up who wrote these movies. It's all the same people
No, they're all
with
the
different
same.
names.
They just
Wow.
do was it pseudonyms?
Yep.
So they're like, well, technically, I think they had to actually do that to get around all of these things. They're like loopholes.
Yeah.
Where like the BFI would not allow them to release something unless they had multiple people working on this.
British Film Institute, I'll have you know.
Yeah.
But also when it came to
Not the
distributorship.
body fat index.
Yeah. So when they would go and they would
I don't think
market,
that's a thing.
because they would co-market with stuff like, let's say, Universal Pictures or so on, and they would say, well, here's 5 scripts. What do you pick? And there was an instance when they were trying to make a TV show where they had picked all from one writer who we'll get into later. And basically Tony Hinds like, this is a shit show. You don't even know that this is all the same person. Like, you don't know what we do. You're done. And he pulls the plug.
Wow.
Super weird.
Right.
I wish I was in this time period with them making these films.
It'd be chaos,
just like,
dude.
I know, but this is what I thrive
essentially
in
all you
chaos.
have to do is just like hang on to the coattail
Yeah.
and just ride it until it ends. And you're like,
Exactly.
well, okay, I got a bunch of credits for all this shit. I mean, we put out how many goddamn films in the course of 10 years?
Right.
I
Over
think I'll be
250 films and TV products.
Yeah.
I think I'll be all right.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so cool that they used all the same people, because the documentary I was watching, they were like, hey, we were one of the only like studios doing
Right.
continuous work. And they're like, this is so unusual for the industry. And I was like, that's awesome.
Absolutely. I mean, and at the end there, that's when, I'm jumping ahead, but I always
Please
do
do.
this.
Hey, it's your show.
You can't really do a
Right.
timeline on this because there's so many things that are moving at the same time.
Like at the end, when it's all said and done, the British film industry actually commemorated, I guess you can say, Hammer Films, and they like gave them this giant award for contributing to English
Oh,
cinema and English.
Yeah, it was in 1968. They got the Queen's Award for Industry because they brought in £2.5 million each year for 3 years consecutively.
damn.
Yeah, it's
Which
just
you're talking
freaking
68
awesome.
money.
Yeah.
Which also at that time, the pound outweighed the dollar significantly.
Wow.
Pun intended, of course, with the weight reference. There you go.
Right. So when they first started out, what's really interesting is when you think of Hammer films, at least to me, you're going with Frankenstein, Dracula, Mummy, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, all of the classics.
Or Mrs. Hyde, Sister Hyde, if you will.
Sister Hyde, exactly. But in all reality, what they originally wanted to do was have them just be essentially these quota quickie films that they wanted to start out with. And they're like, okay, slam it all together. It can be sloppy as fuck. Who gives a shit? We're not really aiming to get like a big crowd here. We just want to be in between A and in between B, right? So here's a major motion picture here. Here's a major motion picture here. What's an in-between month where we can release this just to satiate?
Satiate. Yeah.
Satiate. There we go. I'm coming along now, guys. Every once in a while.
Got it.
Yeah, just to appease, the people who are essentially just waiting for the next film.
So the first one they do, River Patrol, 1948. It's literally a movie about nylon smugglers. So, this is not like high art.
Sounds sexy.
And then from there, this is kind of weird. They buy the rights to a radio play and do it as a film.
Is that Dick Barton?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it becomes like a series that I'd never even heard of before this.
Yeah, so it's like a whole BBC like big thing that
but then
they had.
other companies ripped it off. They made up their own characters who were like radio personalities and had these adventure movies. And it's like, it's so art imitating art in this period.
Right,
it's very
absolutely.
much like we were talking about when we did Tales from the Crypt and everything. Everything is so copy and paste that eventually it's like the head eating the tail kind of.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like I'm reading this, and in my mind, when I see Dick Barton, I'm like Dick Tracy.
Yeah,
that's just what I see. You right? And so I was thinking to myself, I don't know if that's like a reference to like private, as in private eye. So they're saying Dick. Like Dick Tracy, he's a private eye, or is it Dick Barton because he's kind of a private eye also? But it's not. Is his name Dick? Is his name Richard? If his name's Richard, I guess that all makes sense. Is it Richard Tracy? Is it Rickard? Is it Richard Barton?
It is Richard Barton, and he was a secret agent.
Ooh.
Okay,
that's because I only know that because the 48 movie is called Dick Barton Secret Agent.
That makes sense.
I also might be guessing. Just realized that maybe it's to throw me off of his scent because if he was a real secret agent, would he tell me?
Yeah, so I mean, they did a host of different films that weren't exactly the horror-esque and or sci-fi, right? Which essentially is what ended up boosting them to, I guess, critic fame. Right, is with the first sci-fi film that they came out with. But I'm jumping ahead here. Although you said you don't do the whole chronological thing with me. This is my podcast, damn it. Do it. No. So the next thing I wanted to cover is essentially how many different locations they went through when it comes to the production studio. Right. Okay. I think they went through 4 different studios over the course of like 3 years. So,
well, that's a little bit frustrating because there's co-branding, there's different things as far as like, MGM studios. So by and large, when you're doing sets, when you're doing, there's the famous, what do you call it? The Bray Studios location is like the central hub.
Right. But I mean, how many times, I think 2 of the 3 or 2 of the 4 film studios were off the River Thames. Which is essentially like, I don't know if it was like a neighboring mansion. They were all mansions. Apparently everybody owned mansions out there. They're like, fuck it. Let's go to this next one, Yeah. So initially they were at Mansion Dial Close. That was in 1949, but they were forced to move because they were doing a lot of nightly shoots and the residents around weren't too happy about how loud they were being. Which is pretty understandable. But they're like, well, I mean, we can't afford to like go to an actual studio lot. So we're going to work with what we got, right? I mean, why not? After that, they go to Oakley Court Mansion. And it was there where they filmed 5 separate movies. Man in Black in 1949. Room to Let. I might have messed up that one.
No, it's Room to Let. Yeah, it's a rental.
Oh, okay. 1949, Someone at the Door in 1949 as well. So that's 3 films all within 1949. So they're just
plus The Adventures of PC.
They're slamming them out.
Yeah.
What the Butler Saw in 1950 and The Lady Craved Excitement in 1950. Ooh,
oh yeah, she did.
Sounds exciting. I like it. In 1950, Hammer moved again. This time it's to Gilston Park, which is a country club in Harlow, Essex. I feel like Essex is a fancy word for like a suburb. Maybe not. I don't know.
It's a place.
Is Essex a place?
Officially, fuck them. We won the Revolutionary War. Am I right? Sorry, we have.
I could also be talking
of our
out of my ass.
listenership is from the UK. So, boy, what, governor? I know what Essex is.
Right. So the movies that they slammed out there were the Black Widow, the Rossiter case. I don't know how it's pronounced. To Have and to Hold, and The Dark Light. They were all made in 1950. So, what was that? 4 films, 3 months apiece?
Dude, that's awesome.
Fucking slamming them out. Raw dog. So, yeah, 1951, they essentially moved to Down Place or Bray Studios.
Bray Studios was a delightful home that was so tiny that very often boom operators would have to stand outside of the home and stick microphones on a rod through a window. It was so delightful that it would rain through the roof.
Right.
So much so that director Terry Fisher had to advise his actors to continue acting despite torrential downpour. That's fucking nuts.
Yeah.
But people loved it. I mean, you're hearing people like Hazel Court talk about this shit, and she's like, it's the time of my life.
Right.
Yeah.
I
right.
was being rained on in a Victorian dress, but it was lovely.
I don't know if I believe that.
I definitely think it's a little bit of nostalgia.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. But I mean, I can imagine us yokels now looking back into seeing some stuff that went down there as far as how fucking shitty some circumstances were.
But
and
you
you're
can like laugh about
you're
it.
like, oh man, they really went through some tough times. And
Yeah.
then they're like, this is fucking bullshit.
It's raining. I hate this.
But I mean, essentially, it became completely renovated. So they renovated the entire studio, the entire lot, and then that's where they renamed it Bray Studios, and that's where all of the future films that are so iconic, like Dracula and you know the steps and everything. That's where you see Bray Studios.
Yeah, and so much so that like if you know your Hammer films, there is the staircase shot. There is the foyer shot, stuff that you can see repetitively, but that they dressed well. And actually, because of the famous Bray Studios, you actually got vital team members of Hammer from that.
Oh, yeah,
So that,
absolutely. I mean, everybody that jumps into these films ends up staying and not, I don't want to say rides the coattail of Hammer films, but they just keep them for the next film and for the next film and for the next film. And then it's not so much like, oh shit, we need to find this actor for this. They literally have a list and they're like, oh dude, hey, what
Just
are you
shuffle.
doing? What are you doing next month? Are you free?
They're basically salaried.
Right.
So like Anthony Nelson Keys, Jimmy Sangster, they're just meant to paint and patch and revise this dilapidated house that you couldn't change the furniture in. So they were working a full-time job just on the house, not including filming, right?
Right.
Both of them went on to be producers. Jimmy went on to write multiple movies just because they were handymen. That's how loyal the people were.
Yeah, it's the experience you accumulate just over the years of being around great people who kind of shine on each other.
They had to have been having fun if they're all going to continuously work like this together.
Oh, absolutely. But you could also imagine maybe there was a little bit of butting heads. I mean, with so many people working in close confines for so long. I mean, you can imagine you don't probably ever read about there being any issues, but I mean, fuck.
Yeah.
After seeing you fuck boys for a little bit, I'm like, I need a break.
These guys are mean. They said they didn't miss me when I was gone for 7 months in a cave reading Wikipedia.
I hate you.
You saw that Patreon video, huh?
Yeah, but who was on the knee and who was on the bed, huh?
Oh, I'm just much better at it than any of you.
Chad's a giver. Go on, Jake. Were you going to explain what was on the Patreon video, or were we just gonna...
Oh, yeah. If you want to, I'm not going to explain what was on there. I'm just going to leave the mystery. But if you want to throw money our way, you can find out the fuck we're talking about. Ooh, the mystery. So delightful. I'm still entertaining the idea of the boudoir shoot. I'm just going to say that now.
Yeah, I mean, dude, I already have some Daisy Dukes, man. So maybe bust them out.
Are they made out of lace?
Well, they could be.
There we go. If you could pay me $100 a month, then I'll get them lace. I'll get them custom made.
I feel like we could have a few patrons lined up.
Yeah, so they could see the cock shaft. Yeah, I think there'd probably be a few.
So the next step in my, you like how I was just like,
yeah, moving on. How do you pick up after cockshaft? I think that conversation is dead. He's dead, Jim. Star Trek reference. Fuck Star Wars. I'm gonna say that now. Haven't watched the trailer. Won't watch the trailer.
From cock and balls and shafts and the likes, we go to new relationship formed within Hammer Films. Hammer and Exclusive signed a 4-year production and distribution contract with Robert Lippert, who is an American film producer who essentially strikes a deal with them where he does a lot of the distributing, there we go, in America, and actually throws a couple bones back to Hammer's way in form of American, like big name American actors to be in the films. So it's kind of cool. They both work for each other, co-promoting essentially.
Yep. Interesting.
So
were these as big in the US at the time as?
Yes and no. It's interesting that, how can I put it? The names are so varied, right? Did you guys know, Jake, did you notice how different a US release of a Hammer film as far as the name is compared to the English version?
100%.
It's completely changed. And I'm like, I would have no idea that was essentially the same film.
So I actually did some research because, I mean, obviously I love the Misfits, right? And so several Misfits songs, 1 million years BC, so forth, are reference either the same subject matter as Hammer or literally the Hammer work. And so one of them was called The Fanatic. And you're sitting there going, because obviously Chad is the foremost authority on music.
Absolutely.
He's saying there is no Misfits song called The Fanatic, but there is a song called Da Da Da, my darling, utter a single word.
For a second there, I thought we had Glenn Danzig in the presence.
But I didn't shrink a foot.
And
Man.
your chin didn't grow out. Like,
Dude, who's sending us a copy of Veronica or whatever his shitty movie is so we can review it? I'm not going to pay for it, but I will definitely watch the fuck out of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Robert Lippert helped finance more than 300 films in his life, which is kind of cool. The guy's been around a little bit. He's a little bit of a whore when it comes to films, you can say. He's quoted as saying, this is fun. The word around Hollywood is Lippert makes a lot of cheap pictures, but he's never made a stinker. I feel like maybe he's kind of ribbing himself a little bit. I can't imagine him being very serious about that, but I thought that's
one
fun.
thing that the Brits were very acclaimed for when it came to the American movie model. They never missed the deadline. There were times where the producers and stuff were like, we could use another week. No. You have 6 weeks exactly, because as soon as you're done, you're working on the next film.
Yep. What's so great about that as well is, I don't know if you've noticed this, I'm sure, Jake, you have. Any of the films that you've looked up are all within, the golden hour of 90 minutes.
Except for, of course, The Phantom of the Opera, which I was dying to watch. Right. 2 hours, 44 minutes. How about fuck that?
Yeah, every single one of the classics, 93 minutes, 90 minutes. 98 minutes. And the reason for that is because the BFI, the British Film Industry, British Film Institute had strict guidelines, and they had to be no more than 90 minutes.
Weird. All right.
If there are actually a couple of instances where films were, going into 2 hours long, and they're like, nah, you got to fucking cut some shit. So yeah, it's kind of neat because I'm all about it.
Yeah, it's a perfect timeline.
Exactly. And I think also the reasoning for that is a lot of these films were released as a double bill. So when it comes to a theatrical release, they were also piggybacked on with another film.
Okay.
So sometimes even make their own films, like they would pair She with 1 million years BC. And so they're marketing, hey, you can get 2 films for the price of one, and they can try and build stars, because when you get into the later Hammer stuff, not necessarily best actresses, best looking, for sure.
Right, exactly.
Actress, not so much.
Okay.
Right.
I missed the double feature days.
Yeah, good old time. Well, I mean, there's the drive-in.
The drive-in. Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like that's the only thing that's kind of reminiscent of the double feature.
What I hate is the fucking intermission. Just to show me the 2 movies. I don't have time.
You don't like the little hot dogs and popcorn dancing around and stuff?
Let's all go to the lobby where they don't have vegan snacks. And Jake can go fuck himself all the live long day.
I thought you would bring like carrot chips or something.
You mean kale chips? They're delicious and nutritious, and they have nutritional yeast that tastes kind of like cheese, or at least what I remember cheese tasting like over a decade ago. I'm sensitive about it. Let's move on, Brian.
Moving on. So the next big break, essentially, for Hammer Films, because they're throwing out all these quota quickies, just trying to fill in the gaps of these major motion pictures. They try to delve into a little bit of sci-fi / horror, and they release the Quatermass experiment.
Correct.
From
Do you know about the Quatermass experiment? So it was originally a serial series in film that they then got the rights to, and they did as a movie. And so you might have noticed that the serial was E-experiment,
right,
but that their movie is experiment.
And the reasoning for that is because
rated X, nailed to the X.
But what's interesting about that is I'm like, oh fuck, there's gonna be titties and vajay in this. No, the rated X
at that time was like PG,
but also rated X in British film industry is completely different than what rated X is here.
Oh yeah,
so rated X over there is rated R. So it's not the X that you guys are hoping it is. And what's really great about that as well is they were originally going to say, okay, it's Quatermass E-experiment, and they're like, nah, let's fucking exploit the shit out of this. So we're gonna drop the E, and we're gonna make in bold red writing
a black
X.
and white poster, the only color X.
Right, and of course you're gonna have these people that are like, oh my god, this sounds raunchy as
great
shit,
marketing.
right? Absolutely. That is brilliant marketing. So they essentially Quatermass experiment is about, I believe it's 3 astronauts go blasted into space. They return, they lose transmission there, from the radio tower. The spaceship comes back, only 1 astronaut's left, and he's like showing strange signs. He has like, I don't know, like almost a catatonic state. Nobody really knows what's going on with him, but he has no idea where the other crew members are. There's just, I think it's great how it's just their spacesuits.
Yes.
And it's just like empty spacesuits, and you're like, what happened? They're really just taking a shower in the back, So he ends up going to the hospital. From the hospital, one of the clinicians from the rocket group that they're originally from was like, you know what, these fucking doctors, they don't know what they're talking about. We're talking about a guy that went to space and back. They don't have any idea what they're talking about. So they end up bringing him back to their own lab, and from there you can kind of see like the transformation, I should say, and that's what really kind of boosted the reviews from the critics, and everybody was just like, oh my god, it's crazy seeing the transformation on film. I've never seen anything like this before, and it kind of threw Hammer, it put them on the map essentially.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was pretty cool.
And then they did multiple sequels to it.
Yeah.
They went on to exploit the X thing again, because they did X the Unknown. But it was the sequel to Quatermass Experiment, which is called Enemy from Space. John Carpenter cited that movie as one of his biggest influences in making his own music because he loved the score so much.
Oh, that's cool.
Which is super rad, because a lot of people, when you think Hammer films, you very much think the visuals. It was color. It was blight. I mean, the type of blood even had its own name in Kensington Gore. So, I mean, it is very over the top. It was the Kodak Eastman color. This is cutting edge shit. But the music and everything was still quite good as well. The acting was still quite proficient. So it's very odd, because you want to dismiss it as schlock. The film industry at the time dismissed it as schlock, but then they were beholden to them both economically and then in terms of art. Like, look at since Hammer Films. Can you name a single British film company in any genre that has done what they've done ever? No. The answer is no.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, from the success of Quatermass Experiment, that's when they actually decided, you know what, maybe we don't need to do these quota quickies, and we should actually delve our time into making these full feature-length films. And that's where you have the start of their horror, I guess, aspect or history part of...
Right. What was their first movie?
The first horror movie. Well, technically, I feel like it is Quatermass Experiment,
which is actually their 43rd movie altogether.
Damn.
Right. So Quatermass Experiment is technically like their first key horror film.
Okay.
which
And
is
then-
more
Which is like sci-fi horror.
But
Exactly,
exactly.
yeah.
And we've talked about it before where there's subgenres of horror.
Yes.
So what classifies something as horror is whatever you feel like scares you,
Right.
right? It could be a movie about clowns. Some
My
people are like,
in-laws.
"Oh my god, clowns are amazing." Other people are like, "That is fucking terrifying."
Right.
So it's just really whoever's watching it. The key ones that I'm going to delve into next are the classic horror films.
Okay.
So we're talking The Curse of Frankenstein.
Yes.
The first classic that they made, 1957, had to be revised as to not be too closely similar to Son of Frankenstein in 1939, which is a Universal film.
So you know all about, so I'm going to talk to Chad. So just mind your own manners.
Right, right.
So originally they were going to actually hire very old by this point Boris Karloff to do the film,
Okay.
and they were going to make him up and everything. Then they get word that Universal wants them to do all this because they want to file an injunction against them to stop them from doing it, to send a message that you will not do this source material.
Wow.
Because originally, so check this out. A homeboy from America goes over there and he's like, "Hey, I wrote this fucking script. It's dope as fuck. It's called Frankenstein." And they're like, what?
And they're like,
And so they're like, it's not a bad idea because Frankenstein from Mary Shelley was already in the public domain at this time. Universal's Frankenstein was not. So they got the bright idea that they would make their own Frankenstein movie based on the original source material. Now that's where Universal's copyright comes in, because they say their plan is to let them make this movie and then cut it off at the head and then try and buy the movie out for a very significantly lower
Right.
cost, saying you would never be able to release this but for us.
Dirty bastards.
Yeah. So it wasn't until I think it's the Horror of Frankenstein that they got the rights from Universal to market it with the flat top head and the similar
Right,
makeup.
right.
Because at that point, what Universal did, they got the American distribution rights.
Right.
So at this point, they already have stuff in the works, and then they find this out and they go, well, fuck. So you have Christopher Lee working, and they find him 6'5".
6'5", right.
And you think his voice more often than anything, but at this point, he was just meant to be a physically imposing
Which
figure.
I believe there's a Frankenstein that was 6'7", I think is the Universal, was 6'7".
Well, yeah, but he had the lifts on.
But exactly.
And then David
exactly.
Prowse played him, who played Darth Vader. He was also significantly taller than Christopher Lee as well.
Right,
Wow.
right.
And by that point, he was wearing a wetsuit that had like prosthetics on it because it was so rote at that point that he didn't have to do the lengthy makeup process. But it's very interesting because Lee talked about by this point he'd had over 10 years of acting experience in the theater. He had mime experience. He had all this. So he basically was hired because he was tall and he could do shit without opening his mouth. And he consciously did things that I don't know if
That's
you
so
would
true.
notice.
I don't know if I like that, but
So he'd move his arms in a different way than he'd move his legs to denote that he was hodgepodge
pieces.
together.
Right. Okay.
Like stuff that I think you dismiss at a simple viewing, but if you watch this as art, it's like,
Right.
damn, dog, get it.
Yeah. Yeah,
It was
absolutely.
shot on a budget of £64,000. It made its money back 70-fold,
Wow.
70-fold.
but it is still not their most successful film. In terms of commercial success, it was On the Bus, which is a Benny Hill style comedy on a double-decker bus, is their most
Yep.
profitable film of all time.
Wow.
Yeah. Do you want more notes on this? Because I can keep talking. This is the one I did the most research on because
Yeah,
I
I mean,
love this
Isn't
movie.
this one of the first ones that they used in color
Yes,
when horror
yes.
wasn't
This is the
in
first
color?
horror film to be made in true color. Other films,
That's pretty cool.
Other films got away with gore because they were using monochrome photography.
Just
Wow.
like Psycho when you're using chocolate syrup.
Right.
And actually, the color element is one of the reasons why Christopher Lee wanted to do this, because he was actually friends with Boris Karloff. They were actually neighbors and cricket fans together. So they actually had a cordiality between them. He didn't want to step on his toes, but he ends up doing this because he gets to bring it into a modern era. But you look at his body of work, he plays everything. He plays the Asian guy in The Terror of the Tongs. He
I'm
plays the
offended.
Mummy. He plays Dracula. And a lot of those kind of roles he plays multiple times. Frankenstein he only did once because the definitive representation of that character,
Well, I mean,
Boris Karloff.
It's it's the same thing with the opposite, right? I mean, and this is what one of the notes that I'd put down for this film is this is the initial marriage between Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing.
Yes. And they're great together.
And they both feed off each other throughout the history of Hammer, either with Victor Frankenstein and the Monster or with Van Helsing and Dracula.
Yeah, and in the Flesh and Blood documentary, it's actually narrated by both of them, which is kind of cool to have them play off of each other. But one thing that I thought was really interesting was Lee actually was excited to wear all the makeup because Phil Leakey had done the prosthetic and everything, and they worked together to kind of come up with something that was different enough but familiar enough, right?
Right.
So Lee gets excited because he's like, okay, well, if I do a good enough job, people are going to want to know what I really look like. So my next movie will be a bigger success. He happened to be correct through that back-asswards thinking.
Yeah.
Now, Jimmy Sangster, the guy who I told you was, carpenter turned producer at some point,
Right.
even specifically mentioned, it ain't easy to convey emotion beyond 1.5 pounds of makeup. Talking about that's how much he did. And he still does a very evocative job.
Yeah.
When he takes the bandages off his face,
Yes.
it's a great visual. And when it pans in super close to him, and that is burned into my brain forever. It's just a shame that it kind of looks janky because I'd love to get a tattoo of it, but people be like, what the fuck's wrong with your tattoo? I'm like, hey, it's its face. Now, Roy Ashton was another one of the makeup artists, and he noted that if he was given a month before filming, that was a, quote, long time. This is not something where you weren't making a film by committee like your Star Wars bullshit and all that. This was a bunch of guys flying off the cuff.
From there, you have the Revenge of Frankenstein.
Can I keep going a little bit on?
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Go on.
Sorry, I thought I was seeing do you have anything else on this?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Go for it.
Like I said, I'm a huge fan because my favorite of the Universal monsters is Frankenstein and always has been. So this one was I was excited to watch because I think I'd seen it as a kid, but I watched the full thing and it's great. We always talk about me watching things at like 1.5 speed or whatever. This is an easy breezy watch at normal speed. Now, when Lee shows up on set, he's initially disappointed he has no dialogue. If you look at Mary Shelley's source material, the monster speaks.
Yeah,
so
he's eloquent.
Exactly. And so he says, confound it, I don't have any dialogue. And Peter Cushing says, consider yourself lucky. I've read the script. I love him.
Yeah.
He's so good, and he's so good in this film.
Little quips here and there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and then have you heard the Pass the Marmalade? So this is a thing that the true fans of Hammer talk about, which is the juxtaposition from when Victor Frankenstein's mistress gets murdered by the creature. Spoiler alert. That joke never gets old.
Yeah.
But anyway, it cuts straight from that to Victor having breakfast with his cousin and fiance, and he says, "Pass the marmalade." And so it's kind of your Hammer horror version. And now for something completely different, which I
Is it
just
to
love.
show that
Moving on.
he's the true monster?
Well, he doesn't do he's completely unaware of that situation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I thought
it's
it was
his
more like
monster.
you're saying he knew and he's just like, my normal day's going.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can tie it to, so Jimmy Sangster, again, whose name, you're going to hear these names kind of pop up over and over again. He denotes it as, you have to give the audience time to relax before you scare the living shit out of them. Direct quote, I'm not the one swearing in that scenario. But that's the point, is there's a brief reprieve, it's normalcy, we decline, and then when it comes back, you have more terror.
One of these documentaries, though, I thought they said that their Frankenstein, the Dr. Frankenstein, that the Hammer films made him kind of a piece of shit, where the other one...
Oh, he is.
Oh, okay.
So check this out. So in the Universal films, it's the creature who gets movie after movie.
Right.
In these, it's Dr. Frankenstein.
Right. Okay, that's kind of what I was thinking.
At one point, an American distributor made it so that he had to have a rape scene, which Cushing wasn't comfortable
Whoa.
with. The girl wasn't. It was very awkward, and it was not well received even on the set. The director, it was Terry Fisher, just says, I'm not filming any more of this.
Huh.
He shows him start to ravage her, and then that's it. And then it gets cut anyway. But that's how low they get the character to be despicable.
Right.
In the first one, he does despicable things. In the second one, it's a very interesting arc, I will tell you. The first one ends with him being put to death.
Right. I mean, it almost seems like throughout the films, throughout the history of the Frankenstein films within Hammer, he digresses through time. At one of the later films, he's actually in a mental hospital, and he is essentially killing patients and using their body parts to create a new monster.
Yeah, in the second one, he makes an entire body out of hobo hearts. Because they're poor, and he just starts cutting body parts off them, which is actually how you know.
We got loads of them here.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The hobo parts? I'm not that vegan. I'll eat some hobo meat, but that's fine. But one dude has a tattoo of two snakes intertwined, and that's how you know that a Mr. Dr. Frank, as he is at the end of the movie, is actually Victor Frankenstein, the reanimated man in a Frankenstein body. It's awesome. I read the novelization, 196 pages of waste because it's the exact same as the fucking movie. No new details. I was like, really, dog? But anyway,
all right.
I'm a big fan of it. If you can, they're super fun. Also, if you can find original copies of the soundtracks or novelizations of these films, hugely valuable in the collector's market.
Huh.
I only found digital stuff, but if you want to send us shit for free, by all means, hit us up. I'll give you our P.O. box. I'll collect it. I'll be rich. You cannot be. It's fine. And then, so in the second one, here's something interesting. Did you find this out, Brian?
Go on.
Cannibalism in the second one. Did you know that?
I did not.
So the whole point was that was the most horrifying thing that the director could think of. And while it's not overtly cannibalistic in terms of the way it's seen, you know, it's violence upon violence, but it's referenced based on a chimpanzee who had the same, you know, procedure. He ate another chimpanzee. So they talk specifically about cannibalism. Now you compare this movie to a little film called Night of the Living Dead. This one is first. George A. Romero, you fucking hack.
Ooh.
No, but they're presented completely differently.
Right.
But you could see at that point, I mean, by modern standards, it's like you have movies like a Serbian film where it's like baby fucking and stuff, and that's what's scary. But back then it was just like a person would take a bite of a person without a kerchief wrapped around his neck. How uncouth.
I feel like anytime we say Serbian film, we need to just bleep it out from the recording so that the listeners don't get too intrigued and go check it out for themselves.
Yeah.
Because it is something that you will never, ever unsee.
And if you want to see what David Prowse thinks is his best acting of all time, including Darth Vader, you want to watch Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell.
Okay.
And that, I think, is my notes on Frankenstein. I probably could have done more because it is good.
I mean, I think this is the conversation we were talking about in the kitchen when Sierra walked in, was the girthiness as far as how much or how many Frankenstein films there actually were.
Oh, yeah.
It essentially, like I like to tell Michelle, because she loves this so much, beating the dead horse.
Yeah.
So the next one you have is Evil of Frankenstein in 1964. You have Peter Cushing as Victor Frankenstein, reprising his role.
Yep.
And then you have New Zealand wrestler Kiwi Kingston.
Oh.
Who sucked.
As the monster.
Yeah, he's fucking terrible. They even acknowledge, the director's like, I wish I would have found somebody who could act.
Right. And, you know,
But he's fucking huge. Don't get that
he's
twisted.
a giant dude.
Okay.
He's a giant dude. And within this film, though, within the third, they finally have the similar look to the Universal Pictures monster with the flat head.
top, yeah.
With the flat top, like Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Bison, I'm going to come down and I'm going to kick your ass.
Frankenstein finds creature frozen in ice and thaws it out. Had to dull mind. He uses a hypnotist to try and revive his dull senses. The hypnotist is like, no, fuck that. I'm going to control this monster and wreak havoc on everybody.
I'll betray you.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's a little bit of fun, but yeah. So the next one you have is Frankenstein Created Woman. I'm just going to be jumping through these because, again, there's so many of these Frankensteins. The original Frankenstein was in 1957. Then they had the second one that came out in 1958, a year later.
Which is still 10 years before Night of the Living Dead.
Wow.
That's crazy. So from there, you have another 6 years to the Evil of Frankenstein, which we just talked about with Kiwi Kingston, the wrestling Frankenstein. Then in 1967, 3 years later, they have Frankenstein Created Woman. This is no Christopher Lee or anything. It's just Peter Cushing and Susan Denberg, who is essentially a new female monster.
She was hot.
So is that
That's
the
all.
first? Okay.
It's not a skin flick, but they get into it later. Let me ask you this, Chad. Which title do you like better for the second one? Revenge of Frankenstein or Blood of Frankenstein? Because he doesn't actually enact any revenge, which is kind of disappointing.
Sorry. Repeat the question.
Revenge of Frankenstein or Blood of Frankenstein?
Which one did I watch?
No, which title sounds more titillating?
Oh, Blood?
Oh. Because the working title was Blood of Frankenstein. When they conceived it under Blood of Frankenstein, they thought that they had to reattach the doctor's head because he's supposed to be put to the gallows at the end of the first one. You find out that he just escapes the guillotine altogether. So
Okay.
it's just a quick question, an anecdote while Brian revised his notes.
Oh.
There we go. So I particularly like the storyline with Frankenstein Created Woman. What's interesting about it is you first get the henchman of Frankenstein, who's Hans. He's a reprising role throughout the later Frankenstein films.
The remaining, yeah.
You know, the remaining films, exactly. And with Hans, you actually find out that he's in love with the daughter of an innkeep, and she is horribly disfigured in 1967 terms, I guess. That sounds really
She
bad
had
to
a
say.
little scar.
She essentially, she's paralyzed on the left side of her body, and she has like disfigurement.
Which is
Okay.
basically Carl from Revenge of Frankenstein.
Yeah, exactly. So local assholes come into the tavern, they get drunk, and they end up making fun of, like, poking fun of the girl.
Okay.
Because she's different, and we're like a bunch of assholes that are like, let's make fun of her. Hans ends up defending her honor. He slices one of them. They take off. Well, as retribution or as payback, they go and they come back to the inn and they steal all the wine. They're like, well, let's get more fucked up and let's not pay for all of this because this is crazy and we're a bunch of crazy dudes. The innkeep ends up finding them and they beat the shit out of them and kill them. Well, I forgot to mention this. Hans' father gets executed. He witnesses this and he becomes like kind of like a derelict. And Frankenstein ends up taking him in like under his wing and kind of having him be his henchman or his like,
protege.
Exactly.
His young ward, if you will.
So when the innkeep gets killed, everybody automatically, like the authorities automatically assume, okay, Hans did it. Because he's had a troubled past and everything. Not to mention one of the local yahoos that was, making fun of the girl. His father is like a high up constable, right? Go figure.
They always
it's almost
are.
right. It's like something that could like be relatable to like us now, right? You're like, everybody knows that guy.
Yeah, for sure.
So he gets blamed. He ends up getting put on trial and they find him guilty and they kill him. From there, Christina, the disfigured girl, becomes so depressed she ends up killing herself because they kill him. Okay, this is when it gets interesting because Frankenstein believes that you can take the soul from one body and put it into another.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not so much of I'm gonna take body parts here and there and transfer it over. It's I'm just going to absorb the mind and transfer it over into another mind. And you have Christina's body and Hans's mind. And you transfer it over.
Whoa, that's sexy.
That happens.
Yeah.
Why are you in the bathroom so long?
Yeah, and it's pretty neat, right?
Honk.
And apparently, through all of this, there's a regenerative property, and she becomes this super hot girl, no disfigurement whatsoever. Yeah. And you're like, wow, how did I luck out there? So deformity's gone. She becomes like superhuman strength. She goes after and she has vengeance on these thugs, and which is kind of cool because you're like, I'm sure at the time when this film was made, you're like, oh my God, anybody getting killed, that is awful.
Terrifying.
But now you're just like, oh, dude, she's totally getting revenge for her fallen lover, right? And then she ends up having this inner conflict within herself, thinking, well, is it me wanting to kill these, or is Hans actually taking over my body? And that's actually that is the case. And then she kills herself because she can't really control between herself being good and Hans wanting retribution. And yes, she ends up just killing herself.
Wow.
That's
She's gonna kill herself twice?
Dark, yeah.
Damn.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool film. Absolutely. So,
and then you get Horror of Frankenstein, right? Which is the
you have
remake.
Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed.
Oh, there you go.
In 1969.
69.
Right. Frankenstein attempts to cure a colleague of brain damage. Insanity and terror ensues. I mean, a lot of it is a rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try and revive a colleague. He ends up not being the guy I once knew. He ends up going on killing rampage. He ends up getting killed. Frankenstein vanishes off into the sunset and disappears.
Yeah.
Nobody knows what happens.
This is the one that ends with him getting his hands burned?
Yeah, I think it is actually. Because they reference it later on when he's a doctor in the insane asylum and he has gloves because he can't really do surgery anymore.
He has to hire somebody else to do the surgery at his behest because he can't with the hands.
Yeah, so then in 1970, and I'm assuming this is when a lot of people are on cocaine, they made The Horror of Frankenstein, which was a comedy. Yeah.
A failed comedy.
A failed comedy, very much so. Semi-parody as well as a remake of The Curse of Frankenstein. No more Peter Cushing in this, which, I mean, right off the bat, you're like, who fucking cares? Essentially, is a Playboy Frankenstein gets bored at home, kills father, gets kicked out of medical school, and makes a monster.
Yeah.
Okay.
The end. Yeah.
Not good. But then Cushing comes back for the Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell.
Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell 3 years later. I had a little note. Just kidding. Peter Cushing returns. Because I said Peter Cushing no more. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like, how we're like, oh, well, I mean, Halloween 2018 just bastardizes, Halloween's 2 through 17. This is a very old trope. And especially if you watch the old Universal movies, the continuity there is just butt fucked the entire time. So
right. And this is the one again where Frankenstein's in an insane asylum. He is the head doctor there because they're like, why the fuck should we pay somebody when one of our patients is a doctor? Because that makes sense.
Yeah.
He ends up killing the mental patients instead of harvesting organs, instead of doing it like the old fashioned way, I guess. Yeah. And craziness ensues.
He's Dr. Kevorkian with a tattoo of 2 twine snakes.
Right.
And that's all of the...
And that is, well, yeah. And that's all. There was 7 of them. There was 7 of them. Yeah. So I think Dracula's just as many, if not maybe more. Let me double check my notes here.
In terms of like Christopher Lee ones.
Dracula, there were more Dracula films. Yeah. I stand corrected.
With all the ones with Peter Cushing, were they still like getting good returns in the box office?
Yeah,
they were profitable throughout.
Oh, wow.
And
That's
we
impressive.
were talking about this before, where you said it's more or less people pay for the actor.
Yep.
Once upon a time, where people had, what was it, the page or the
it's
card,
like a title page of like
the title page of a movie essentially has a big bold writing the name of the actor, and people are like, wow, I really want to go see it because of so-and-so, not so much of the source material.
That's one of the things that changed Hammer from a distribution company into a filmmaking company, was because Tony Hinds said, people are going to the movies post-war. They don't care if it's good or if it's bad. They care about that after the fact, but they'll go and see anything. It is an act of going out and being social. It's a completely different climate than film before. Film before was very artsy.
It's like an escape.
Endeavor. Exactly.
That's exactly what I love about movies and books is I don't want anything that resembles my real life. I want something weird and out there.
Which is great for Victorian horror because
exactly.
A, it's all in the public domain, so they don't have to pay anybody any rights. B, they already have all this stuff and they have set dressings and everything that are perfect for it. And then C, it's escapism.
Right.
And so it ends up working out pretty well. And then we hit 1958, Dracula.
1958, you have Dracula. Not to be confused with Dracula starring Bela Lugosi in 1931. Renamed in the U.S. as Horror of Dracula to clear the confusion.
Correct. I have that in parentheticals in my notes as well.
Oh, very good. Very good. Based off Bram Stoker's novel.
Which sucks for Peter Cushing because by the time that he became really famous as like Grand Moff Tarkin and everything, he was very old and like wispy. And that's the way that Van Helsing is described in Bram Stoker's Dracula. So I actually heard him talking shit like, I wasn't that wispy when I did that movie. I was pretty fit, dog.
Right.
You're right.
So Christopher Lee is Count Dracula. Peter Cushing is Dr. Van Helsing.
Could you believe how many people were talking about how sexy he was?
Right.
I was like, no, he's not.
At one point, was he sexy? Like, I'm sorry, I must have missed that.
He looked like my vice principal from middle school. I was like, no, he's not.
I think it's more or less like the brooding, like...
Oh yeah, he's a bad boy.
You know what I mean? Well, it's not like the raw strength and power of Dracula, right? It's the seductive, scary darkness.
I heard
him,
somebody say he also didn't have the bloated face of Bela Lugosi, so that helps.
Well, that might also help.
One thing I hate is Martin Scorsese was talking about the introduction of Dracula, where he comes down the stairs and the guy's like, "Lord Dracula, blah," and he's like, "I'm Dracula," and I was like, hence him call what the fuck. But can I make one soapbox?
Go on.
So there's a lot of kerfuffle right now about Martin Scorsese talking shit about Marvel films. He's a diehard Hammer horror fan. He would go with all of his bullshit little friends and they would see it and they would say, oh, Hammer horror, if you see that, like, that it's, quote, a special picture, a certain kind of film, a surprising experience, usually shocking. He was such a big fan of them that he actually did a screening of Blood from the Mummy's Tomb while making Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, and actually was in trouble with Warner Brothers for doing a screening that had nothing to do with the film, even though he called it research. So this is a dude who's a diehard fan. And we can all agree that Hammer films are like, it's so synonymous and analogous to Marvel films in so many ways.
Right.
You have a cyclical cast of characters. You have story structure. You have your bits of. It's so weird to me that this guy could have this staunch opinion about something and yet be so outspoken for decades about his love of this. What do you guys think of that? Am I crazy? Am I just being an overly avid comic book fan?
I honestly think that, and I hate to step on anybody's toes, not step on anybody's toes, but really upset people, I guess, when it comes to my different opinion when it comes to certain directors. But I feel like Quentin Tarantino, Scorsese, some of these big name directors get so used to people saying yes to everything that they say that they're almost like a convoluted, like they're like, oh nope, this is my ultimate answer, and this is wrong and this is right, and everybody's like, oh my god, that is the greatest thing you've ever said, and it makes so much sense.
They're so up their own ass.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree.
Perfect. I'm glad I've been agreed with. You may move on to your next point.
So what's interesting about this is Christopher Lee introduced fangs. He introduced the red contact lenses. Those are all very new when it comes to Dracula. And of course the gore, right? There was never that goriness to the films like there was in Dracula. And that's really what kind of concerned them at first, because they're like, I'm not really sure how receptive this is going to be. Plus, BFI is like, motherfucker, I don't know if we can do this. So there's actually multiple versions of this film. Some are uncut, some are edited very heavily.
Very circumcised.
very heavily. And apparently there's like an old Japanese version that has no cuts in it whatsoever. And
that's
it's
the
super
definitive
rare.
edition. Yeah.
And it's like super rare. I feel like, have they even released it? I don't think they have yet.
It's not an official like Blu-ray or anything like that, but there are releases of it.
Yeah, exactly. So they'll probably end up coming out with like a digital like 4K version of the Japanese unedited version. And once upon a time, I believe they thought it was completely lost.
They did.
Yeah. So I mean that's pretty neat. Harker accepts a job. So Harker is essentially, I'll just go briefly through the storyline of the film. You know, Harker is supposedly a librarian who wants to go work for Count Dracula. He ends up being a relative of Van Helsing.
Oh shit,
son. Right? And so he gets to the castle. Van Helsing looks for his apprentice because his apprentice goes missing. He meets a woman who is bitten by Dracula. Van Helsing opens curtains and essentially fries Dracula. That's just very kind of
that scene
jumping.
Is awesome.
Well, I mean, the ashes.
Yeah.
Oh,
well,
where it rots
even
away?
he like running and jumping and pulling the curtain down, and then he runs back and makes the cross. I was like, dude,
that's his
awesome.
idea. So Peter Cushing was so annoyed that he used so many crucifixes throughout the film. He said that he felt like a quote crucifix salesman. So it's his idea to grab one candlestick, run to the other side, grab the other candlestick, and do an improvised cross. And that's the coolest visual in that film.
And you've seen it done like in films nowadays, but to see it like originally, I was like,
dude,
that is awesome.
Salem's Lot with the two little tongue
suppressors, exactly.
things.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It was very cool.
And this is the big part where you see lots of cuts. That's what Brian's talking about. When it comes to that Japanese version, it shows the full face rotting
melt,
away.
The face melt.
I think the version that was released in England was just the hand.
I don't even think they showed the dust.
Well, they show his hand wither, and then I think they show the dust after, but they don't show his head concaving.
Right.
That's the big thing. And it's a great effect for the time.
Yeah.
And the budget, and the fact that they didn't have time to research.
No, I mean, it still looks good. I was surprised.
I think it looks delicious. He looks like blackened chicken.
I feel like one of the things that the wives talked about in the bonus episode was
the Patreon bonus episode available for patrons.
Right.
Also, if you don't want to become a Patreon patron, if you can show us proof that you have donated to any cancer charity for Breast Cancer Awareness Month, please let me know. Send me a screenshot, and I will be happy to send you a copy of the Patreon bonus episode for absolutely free, no additional cost. Enjoy and continue, Brian.
And it was Hocus Pocus, right?
Yeah, it was
right?
Correct. I did not say that.
They had said something about what it means when, I guess is it continuity when they say something but that hasn't been actually released in the time of the film that it was actually made.
Anachronism.
Anachronism. There you go. So this film is set in 1885. However, when Dr. Van Helsing puts his fur coat on young Tanya, he tells her she looks like a teddy bear. A term that wasn't coined until 1902.
Oh, shit.
Actually,
Theodore Roosevelt, motherfucker. It's American, bitch.
Yeah. So that's all I got for Dracula. Anything
I will
else?
add that
for
of
it.
the 19 films that were produced by Fox in 1966, only 6 were profitable, 2 of which were Hammer films. One being Dracula and the other one being Rasputin the Mad Monk, which Christopher Lee also starred in.
Oh, wow.
And as a promotional giveaway for that film, they gave beards to people in the crowd so they could hide from the forces of evil.
That's awesome.
How fucking weird.
That is weird.
I will not wear someone else's worn beard. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So from there, we have The Brides of Dracula. No Christopher Lee, sad panda. Peter Cushing as Van Helsing, sequel to Dracula, so no Christopher Lee kind of makes sense, right? Because at the end of Dracula, in the first, he's crumbled to dust. Why the fuck would there be another Dracula? Christopher? Like, I mean, this is at a point so early in the films where you can say, okay, somebody died. They're clearly dead. And then later on in the other films, they're like, wait, but I just saw him. It doesn't really make sense.
Well, and
right?
also people weren't collecting these on Blu-ray or anything like that.
Yeah,
You went
that's
to the
true.
cinema
That's
and then
true.
it was gone.
And then you're like, I forgot what happened in that one film, but hey, here's another Dracula.
But here's the thing, I don't know that the people were forgetting because they didn't have like constant media and every other thing.
That's
I can't
true.
remember shit all about what we do in the shadows, even though last week I was telling you guys you need to watch that whole show. I remember it pretty vividly. I hate this goat. It's my favorite line of the whole season. But continue, Brian. sorry.
The alternative working titles were Dracula 2
Starring.
and Disciple of Dracula, which
I don't mind that.
How about-
DOD.
How about Dracula, the number 2, The Grave?
That's not bad. It wasn't very well received.
New.
No. The Monthly Film Bulletin of the UK wrote, the genuinely eerie atmosphere of traditional vampire folklore continues to elude the cinema. This latest sequel in Hammer's apparently endless series adds little to the Dracula legend other than a youthful, good-looking vampire and nothing to the familiar Hammer format of inappropriate color and decor. Yikes.
Damn.
Which is why it's not until 1966, but they do Dracula Prince of Darkness where the prodigal son returns.
Yep, Christopher Lee.
refusing to say a fucking word.
Christopher fucking Lee, man.
He hated the script and was like, nope, not
Wow.
gonna speak. You can't make me.
Yeah, it's funny because afterwards he's like, did you read it? It's fucking awful.
Outwardly mocked the film. It like the effects and everything. It's just a weird movie. I'll be honest with you. It's
so
not that
essentially,
good.
the story takes place 10 years after the death of Dracula. Travelers get stranded outside the castle. Kind of reminds me of Rocky Horror Picture Show.
A little bit.
Essentially, it's a riderless carriage that picks them up. Because that sounds like a great idea. Let me just jump into a riderless carriage. It drops them off right in front of the castle, and the doors swing open. There's 2 tables and like dining, like a dining set and like dinner made, and they're like stranded out in the middle of nowhere.
Hey, this is
Like
awful convenient.
that's like super sweet. Let's check it out. That's when you have the shot of the guy and the girl sleeping in bed. He hears a noise. He goes to investigate. Hans. I think it's Han. No, it's not Hans. It's is it Hork? I feel like no, Clove. They all have fun names. Like all the henchmen, they're like Hans, Hork, Clove. I think Hork might have been in Mummy. Anyways, it's Clove. So Clove is essentially Dracula's
Clove with a K.
Clove with a K.
Yeah,
exactly. He is Dracula's henchman.
And he mixes his blood with ashes to revive him.
The blood with ashes, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
What?
No, that's the other film. That is The Blood of Dracula, or Dracula. Let me see. Taste the Blood of Dracula is the one where they mix blood with the ashes and the ring and the brooch.
Okay, how does he revive him in this one then?
In this one, hold please. Man hears noise in the night, gets killed by a henchman, and uses son of a bitch. You're
Okay,
right.
I was right. I was gonna be like, damn, Don, all
Yep,
that research
that
is
is
wasted.
Right. That is right. So,
Okay.
but in the other film, they actually drink the blood.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it,
Right,
dog.
yeah, so they
if you
drink-
know that it works.
They drink the blood. In this one, he mixes the blood with the ashes, and he revives Dracula. That is correct.
That is correct.
Family members look for lost relatives, encounter Clove. Dracula seduces women and makes them fight for him because that's what Dracula does.
Ooh.
Fight for me, bitches. I like my notes here. This is fun. Monks get involved. Shit gets weird.
What? That's a fucking 4-way if I've ever heard. 5-way. Dracula, 2 monks, 2 ladies. It sounds like a party.
Dracula gets captured in coffin while sleeping. They end up trying to bring Dracula out of the castle. Clove ends up grabbing hold of the carriage, drags Dracula back to the castle. Clove gets killed. Coffin ends up sliding onto the ice moat in front of the castle, which is like one of the iconic scenes, right? Where it's like frozen over moat. And it's like you can see the contrast of like the blood and the white ice, which I think is really cool. And
so
then
he's like impervious to bullets, but they shoot the ice underneath him.
Right.
So he falls into the water.
Ah.
You like
which
that?
I feel
Yeah.
like I mean, how many times have we seen something like that in films?
Batman
like,
Begins.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
My name is Liam Neeson.
Yeah, so and then I'm kind of jumping back to what Jake was saying before. It's Christopher Lee diss. Dracula does not speak in the film save for a few hisses. which I think is pretty hilarious.
It's hilarious.
According
Sorry,
to
I was
Christopher Lee, I didn't speak in that picture. The reason was very simple. I read the script and saw the dialogue.
That's so awesome.
I said to Hammer, if you think I'm going to say any of these lines, you're very mistaken.
Why did he even do the film then?
It's this thing called money.
Oh, did he really need it that bad?
Well, yeah. I mean, they weren't making like fuck you money. This was like a salary, more or less.
Okay.
These movies were successful. Don't get that wrong. But this was not like retire off of one film kind of successful.
Interesting enough, though, the screenwriter, Jimmy Sangster, who we've spoken his name about a few times now, disputed that account from Christopher Lee in his memoir, Inside Hammer, writing that, quote, vampires don't chat. So I didn't write him any dialogue. I like that little witty little comeback, right?
Well, I like that's clearly some damage control for his reputation in like kind of repartee to Lee, because there was dialogue in the other Dracula film. So it's like they don't chat except for the time that they chatted. Remember when they chatted? Okay.
Right. Yeah, he
control.
actually he had a little snarky remark here. Christopher Lee has claimed that he refuses to speak the lines he was given. So you can take your pick as to why Christopher Lee didn't have any dialogue in the picture. Or you can take my word for it. I didn't write any. The film was made back to back with Rasputin the Mad Monk. Interesting enough, we just talked about that.
I did.
Using many of the same sets and casts, including Lee, Shelly, Matthews, and Farmer.
It was actually also shot at the same time as The Reptile.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Shelley later remembered accidentally swallowing one of her fangs in one scene and having to drink salt water to bring it back up again because of the tight shooting schedule, as well as there being no spare set of fangs.
Yeah, exactly. They couldn't wait for her to pass it through, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Hey.
From there, you have Dracula as Risen from the Grave, released in 1968. You have Christopher Lee as Dracula, again. Frozen in the moat. And apparently a priest goes to visit the castle, slips and falls on the ice, cracks his head open, blood seeps down into the moat and goes into Dracula's mouth.
It's
Okay.
amazing.
Wow.
I watched this sequence on YouTube. It's amazing.
But does he talk in this one?
Yes.
Yes, he does,
Okay.
yeah. So priest gets enslaved and does Dracula's bidding. Dracula again entrances females to spread vampirism using his seductive ways.
Whoa.
And, it's really interesting, right? You start to see a pattern with Dracula. He doesn't so much go after any of the burly dudes.
Right.
He's more of the thinker.
Oh.
He's like, well, I'm going to get as many sexy looking women as possible. And then have the guys fall over themselves and join my army.
Yeah, I've definitely seen all the porno parodies of this. They always play out the same.
Right, exactly. Nobody wants to see Frankenstein doing it.
Yeah. Sucking on some big guy's neck.
Fire bad. Come better. Like that?
Yeah, there you go. So Dracula ends up fighting somebody on the parapet. He ends up getting over, I think it's parapet? Parapet?
It's a pair of pits.
Parapet. I feel like it's
Parakeet?
architectural, almost like bridge in between towers, I guess you want to call it. Like the walkway, you see a lot of people fight on these like castles. And they're
Victorian architecture with
anyways,
Brian.
the flying buttresses. So he gets thrown off that. And the first a cross gets thrown from the top of the castle. Apparently, the cross lands in such a way that it's pointing
Spiked
straight
you
up. Go figure. And then Dracula gets thrown off and then lands on the cross. So
Wow.
he gets impaled on the cross, which is kind of a pretty gruesome fatality.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what's interesting about this is a lot of these films, they kind of jump back and forth. I guess maybe more so later on in Hammer films, they're like written a lot looser. They're not like, okay, this is how this ended, so we're just going to continue from here. Well, in this one in particular with the new one, Taste the Blood of Dracula, you have Literally, the first scene is of Dracula on fire, running around with a cross stuck in his back. So you're like, oh, okay, he's not dead. That's great.
Yeah.
That makes sense for why Dracula is still around. It's not like he was frozen in a moat and then blood seeped down into some ice.
Awkward.
Right. But I always thought it was interesting. If you get thrown from somewhere high up and you're Dracula, would you not turn into a bat and fly away?
Does he do that? Does this version do it?
I want to say somebody does get killed by a vampire bat. I don't know if it's Dracula per se. It might have been one of his minions.
But this lore, he doesn't turn into a wolf or a bat, right?
I didn't think so.
That's
I might be
more
wrong.
maybe
recent films?
maybe. I'm
Well,
wrong.
no, it's actually the original.
It's the original book, but not in the movie, right? The 30s Dracula?
No, not he doesn't. do
Right.
that.
Okay.
Anyways,
Then you go to Scars of Dracula in 1970.
Right. From there, you have Scars of Dracula. Although disparaged by some critics, the film does restore a few elements of Bram Stoker's original character. The Count is introduced as an icily charming host. He has command over nature, and he is scaling the walls of his castle, which apparently is something that was not done before.
It's actually an effect they had to do, like Batman style, where then you see it. It's very weird because he still has his cape and everything, and it looks odd, but it's cute.
It also gives Lee more to do and say than any other Hammer films, except for the first 1958's Dracula.
Yeah,
So they had to appease Christopher Lee.
because then by the time they do the next one, Dracula AD 72,
Oh
I
my
mean
God.
he's just kind of there.
Right, exactly.
And then when it gets to the satanic rites of Dracula, I mean, again,
the final film. He's
well,
already
not the final Dracula film, the final Christopher
film
Lee.
with Christopher Lee, and he's already checked out.
Yeah, for sure.
Universally hated by critics is the satanic rite of Dracula. So
Well, what sucks, I really wish you would have come back for the last one, the Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires.
with the kung fu.
Fuck yeah.
Dude.
It's Shaw Brothers.
What?
Yeah,
Oh,
dude.
I'm in.
Dude, it's kung fu and vampirism.
Oh,
It's like Blade, the original.
dude. My erection is so hard right now.
Yeah, so that basically delves into the Dracula arm of Hammer. From there, you have
Actually, Blade came first. Blade first appeared in The Tomb of Dracula, number 10, July 1973. And of course, obviously, Chad, if you would know anything with that brain of yours, The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires did not come out until 1974.
well, fuck-
And we know that this was
fuck
not in
my
production
life.
very long because clearly it's only a 6-week production shooting. So basically, it ripped off Blade,
okay.
even though Blade wasn't really Kung Fu Man in the comics, but whatever.
Yeah. What was Blade in comics?
I mean, he was just a guy.
Oh,
In Tomb of Dracula, he was just a dude with a purple coat.
that's not fun.
Yeah.
So from there, we go on to The Mummy, right?
Ooh, and The Curse of the Mummy is delightful. Or excuse me, rather,
The Curse
And
of
the
the Mummy.
Mummy,
The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb?
no, the first one, Mummy 1959.
The Mummy. Yep.
The Mummy is good. And if you've seen Blood Diner, Blood Feast, you know that you can see the iconography here. It's like it's so much visual referential humor. It's like
Oh, yeah, especially
Herschel Gordon Lewis basically stole a lot of this movie.
reading the scroll and everything.
The
Yeah.
shrine. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So Peter Cushing comes back, and he is the archaeologist John Banning, searching for the tomb of Princess Ananka.
Nanka.
Finds a scroll of life and reads it like a bunch of dum-dums.
Well, his
Because-
dad does. And then
Right,
goes
yeah.
cuckoo bananas.
Exactly.
For 3 years.
And the reason I say finds a scroll and reads it like a dum-dum is because honestly, when does anything ever good happen from finding something in a tomb and then reading it?
But
Yeah.
did he have a movie like The Mummy 1959 to shape his perception of the events?
Well, it's true.
So basically, this is how like delicate people were in their sensibilities back then. He reads the scroll. A mummy comes out from behind a wall. He loses his fucking mind for 3 years babbling
3
to
years.
himself.
Yep.
And it's not until like some mystic force that breaks him from his like spell, and then he gets killed the next day anyway by the same mummy. It is so weird. Like
Wow.
why? And he doesn't like. Yeah, it's very weird. But
Right.
if you've seen like the Brendan Fraser one, they take certain elements, like the woman looking the same and
Well,
everything.
and essentially the fanatic of Ananka, right?
Yeah.
The guy outside the tomb that they come across, and they're like, "Oh, dude, get the fuck away from me, you
gotta
weirdo."
love that. Like, there's a whole sequence where they're like looking for suspects, like pouring through the guy's dad's old documents and everything. And then the one dude's like, "Oh yeah, remember that Egyptian guy who was like, your dad's gonna die, fuck you." And they're like, oh wait, an Egyptian guy moved next door?
Just write him off. No connection. Moving on.
The best part of this fucking movie, Peter Cushing jumps up onto a bookshelf that's like built into the wall, grabs this like spear, then spins around midair and stabs it through Christopher Lee's torso, sticking out the other end.
Wow.
Christopher Lee then breaks the other half and they keep fighting.
That's pretty awesome.
It's
Yeah.
dope.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. Yeah, essentially, and it was what's really cool, and this tells back into, like you said, with the Brendan Fraser movie when it comes to the mummy looking at somebody that resembles Ananka, and they stop fighting because they're like, "Oh my god, I'm basically, my whole purpose is to serve you.
Yep.
What do you want me to do?" So I mean, that happens in part 1 of the new Mummy, or I say new Mummy, but it's like fucking 20 years old now.
Seriously, it's crazy old.
Yeah.
And so in this one, it ends where the mummy's gonna just take her into the swamp and like drown them both.
She like regains consciousness after the fanatic tries to kill her. The mummy kills the fanatic, brings her to the swamp. He wants to take her into the swamp with him, basically to go, right off into the sunset into the swamp. She wakes up, demands him to put her down. He puts her down. The police show up. They shoot him. He sinks into the bog
while holding the scroll.
Exactly.
Ew.
So nobody can use it ever again.
Well, I don't know about that because there were 4 other movies in the franchise.
True. Yeah, apparently it was adapted in a 12-page comic.
I did not know that. I wish I would have.
Wow, interesting.
Brian's busting out the comic book knowledge.
A glass fiber replica of the sarcophagus created for the film is also in the collection of the Perth Museum and Art Gallery.
That's awesome.
That's pretty neat. Yeah, it's actually a pretty fucking sweet sarcophagus.
Awesome.
I like it. It definitely looks like a fucking real thing. So
yeah, it's
bravo.
crazy. They were talking about the set design for the Mummy and just how they made it look like a multi-million-dollar set, and it's just very meager amounts of time and money spent on it.
So the next one we go to is The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb. Came out in 1964. Not filmed at Brave Studios, but at Elstree Studios. Doesn't have any of the Hammer veteran actors.
Yep.
Womp, womp, womp.
No Cushing, no Lee.
Because union rules in Britain decreed that one person could not be credited as the writer, producer, director of a film, Michael Carreras adopted the name Henry Younger for his screenplay, a deliberate analogy to the name John Elder, which was Hammer producer Anthony Hinds' writing pseudonym. So everybody just kind of finding that loophole to keep releasing these films because they're like, "Fuck you guys, we're gonna do what we want," right?
Yeah.
Critics bash it again. I say again, as in multiple films by Hammer at this point just get bashed on by critics because that's what critics do.
But it's commercially successful
all
much
the time. All of these are critically commercially successful.
Dickie Owens, the guy who plays the mummy in this one, actually comes back for the next one.
Right. In his review, Time Out Film Guide, editor and National Film Theater chief programmer Jeff Andrew described it as a, quote, limp Hammer sequel, unquote. That is resolutely unimaginative. Wow.
It's a little harsh.
Yeah, right. From there, you have The Mummy's Shroud in 1967. This is when, again, Eddie Powell played the dummy, the mummy.
Wait, Dickie Owens, I thought
it was
maybe both of them.
Eddie
maybe
Powell.
One did stunt work.
I know the stuntman Eddie Powell is essentially Christopher Lee's stunt double. And
so that's probably what it was, that he did the mummy, the other work.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Can't get Christopher Lee, but I said can't get Christopher Lee, but we can get the closest thing to him.
Oh, no, excuse me. He didn't play the mummy. He played Prem. I was way wrong.
Oh, that's all right. The last Hammer film to contain a bandaged mummy. The final production to be made at Bray Studios. Man finds tomb, man recites ancient texts, mummy rises, wreaks havoc, mummy gets destroyed. Feel like we've seen that before.
Yeah.
You're really reminiscent. But then you get the sexy blood from the mummy's tomb where you get wicked underboob.
You do.
Ooh.
Oh, it's red.
You want to take that one,
I've
Jake?
always liked a good
No,
underboob.
all I care about is the wicked underboob.
Wicked underboob.
It's quote unquote loosely adapted from Stoker's The Jewel of the Seven Stars.
Right. Writer Chris Wicking says the film was one of the last projects that James Carreras brought to Hammer. Wicking wanted to use the title of the book, but Carreras did not. They brainstormed titles and came up with Blood from the Mummy's Tomb, which Wicking thought they would never use, but they ended up using anyways. Besides providing a rare leading role for Valerie Leon, the film is notable for its troubling production. Peter Cushing was cast in the film and completed one day's filming before leaving the production after his wife was diagnosed with emphysema, which is a big thing back then.
And if you listen to the actresses on set, like even the woman who I think that he was supposed to do that rape scene with, they all talk about like how desperately he loved his wife. So this was like a big torturous thing, and so it's super sad time in his life.
Cushing was replaced by Andrew Keir. The R1 DVD of the film released in the United States by Anchor Bay Entertainments contains still photographs of Cushing's day on the production. Director Seth Holt died of a heart attack 5 weeks into the 6-week shoot, collapsing into cast member Aubrey Morris's arms and dying on set.
Ouch.
Yeah. So I feel like maybe this should have been the curse of the Mummy's Tomb.
Yeah.
So, that was the last of the kind of key classic horror films that Hammer came out with. They came out with a lot of other different works. They came out with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Sister Hyde.
Yep.
They did Phantom of the Opera. A couple.
You know, that one was originally written for Cary Grant, and then he backed out. And the reason, so there's a killer dwarf in it, so the Phantom isn't the one killing people, because Cary Grant was supposed to play the Phantom, and then he backed out. So it's just this weird movie with a murderous dwarf.
I'd watch it.
Now, when you think of the Phantom of the Opera, there's a song that you think of, and it's because of Hammer Films, because the 1925 one, silent, no music, no es musicato, but when you think of it, you think. That is Toccata and Fugue in D minor by Johann Sebastian Bach. You're welcome.
Why were we waiting for that?
Yeah. Okay.
I already forgot.
What? I just said it's in the original movie. They didn't have music, so there was none. But when you think of that song, you think of Phantom of the Opera because of Hammer Films.
Okay.
They changed the perception of human life.
I like it.
All right.
I like it.
I'm gonna edit that whole thing out.
There's a few literary adaptations. Having fun with words here. The Devil Rides Out, The Witches, She, The Vengeance of She, and
She, not to be confused with the Misfit song She. That's actually about Patty Hearst. This one's different.
That's it. And The Old Dark House. And then one of the last ones they actually came out with within, I guess you would call it the classic era of Hammer, would be When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth.
Which had Ray Harryhausen. Yeah, which
Pretty
is
great.
awesome. One that I wanted to touch on, if we could, The Legend of the Werewolf, the only werewolf picture that they did. So censors objected very staunchly to this film, and Hammer argued, well, actually, it's less graphic than Hitchcock's Psycho, to which the censors replied, Terrence Fisher is no Hitchcock.
Oh, wow. Fucking burn, dude.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't know if you can
unfair.
clap back from that one.
Yeah.
You just got to take it. You just bend over and just be like, well, I'll have another. Thank you.
And so then they did the 2 TV series.
They did the 2 TV series
the
as
Hammer
well.
House of Horror and Hammer House of Mystery and Suspense.
They also did Journey to the Unknown. So they
Correct.
did 3.
But that's not, it's like a waffler in the horror.
Exactly. It's like the more sci-fi.
And then the last horror movie that they did all together was To the Devil a Daughter in 1975.
And then also, I mean, they have the revival, right? The revival of Hammer.
They've had 2 of them, yeah.
Essentially, well, yeah, this is the latest, like 2019. But you have Let Me In. You have The Resident with Hilary Swank.
A Woman in Black.
Which also,
I
The Resident actually had Christopher Lee. So, which is pretty neat.
Interesting.
There's a
Brings
cute
them
picture
back.
of him having his birthday on set with a giant cake.
The Woman in Black came out in 2012.
On Harry
You
Potter.
have The Quiet Ones.
Okay.
Then you have, just recently, you have The Lodge, which I'm actually really interested in seeing just from all the different reviews I've read.
Yeah, me too. I haven't seen it yet.
So some of the other Hammer films, just as of no, I just want to throw out there.
Hold on. The Lodge has Alicia Silverstone in it. As if. Keep going, Brian.
Yeah, throw that in there, didn't
I
I?
did.
No, it's fine. There's just a few more Hammer films I just wanted to throw in there at the very
Such
end.
as Polly's Two Fathers.
Devil Ship Pirates. You
Oh.
ever heard of that one?
Nope.
Had Christopher Lee in it.
Love it.
It's an adventure piece film. So I think it's like just like pirates like sailing the sea.
What about Monkey Manners?
Nope, never heard of that one.
Yoga and You. Yoga and the Average Man.
Is that real?
Yeah,
Oh,
both
nice.
of those were
That's awesome.
1957.
The Anniversary, starring Betty Davis. OG Betty Davis.
Here's
I like
one
it.
that sounds super exciting. A Man on a Beach.
Oh.
Yeah. At this point, you can tell they're just throwing whatever the fuck they want out there. Like, oh, it's got Hammer Films on it. Nah, it'll be good.
One thing I wanted to mention too. So Jaws was one of our biggest hits. That was a reigning and defending
Right.
classic champion for a while. Now, two things that link it back to Hammer. They did a movie called The Abominable Snowman of the Himalayas. In that, they consciously decided never to show the full-bodied Yeti and only showed glimpses at a time, such as eyes, arms, feet, what have you, which I think was very thematic in Jaws.
Yeah.
They also were doing Nessie for Chad, you with your favorite cryptid, and they planned to basically rip off Jaws, but with Loch Ness Monster. But due to tons of production delays, that project outlived Hammer.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I
Womp womp.
feel like trying to film Nessie or make Nessie within a certain budget
Yeah.
would be a lot harder than doing a giant shark.
Yeah.
So
Well, there was that movie with the little girl, Magic in the Water, where the sea monster eats Oreos. You remember
Yes,
that?
I do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's perfect in that. I can't imagine. I mean, we all think of that as like the quintessence of good filmmaking. Oh, and then there's also Water Horse.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, Water Horse. I say water. You say
Whores.
wait, whores?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm in. And that's pretty much all I got. That's all, folks.
I'm impressed.
Thanks, guys.
This was a lot of fun. And if there are Hammer films that you'd like us to review, please let us know. The hard thing is that just trying to find them that can be relatively inaccessible, but that comes from a lot of contract work where
Yeah,
here's
absolutely.
RPA pictures, here's whatever.
They have
MGM.
a large body of work. It was,
Right.
I mean, this is like literally the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Hammer films. Over 300 plus, I believe. Something along those lines. Jake, do you have the number?
What?
How many films they came out with?
What's over 250
Oh, is it
films and
200?
TV projects?
Yeah, so
Jeez.
I mean, if you got some time to kill.
To Brian's point, like because of their generally pulp nature, they are very consumable in a short amount of time.
Yes.
And it doesn't drag on. While there are
Well, they're
some
all- I mean-
stylistic choices where it's like a long establishing shot, you're not really dealing with stuff where it's static. Cinematographer Freddie Francis was talking about the Hammer and their style. He said that they, quote, put beauty into everything, even the crypts and the coffins. And he was a huge guy because he only was a DP for them on one film. He ended up being a director, and he talked about he had so much fun on his first film that he did another film and he did another film, and then he ended up doing something and becoming something he never intended to be, which is a horror movie director. That's just like the kind of familial
Yeah, I mean, you
relationship
just
they
gain
built.
all that experience from being around people, and you can imagine doing so many sets with so many directors. You end up they rub off on you, and you pick up on some of their directing styles,
Right.
and you run with it basically. So it's kind of neat. It's almost like they're going through an apprenticeship.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
I would definitely phrase it that way. That makes a lot of sense. No.
Yeah. No.
One fun quote that I found was a reviewer for a magazine called Sight and Sound wrote, "A sane society cannot stand the posters, let alone the films." I think that speaks a lot. If you can, go to your little Google image search and search the, posters.
The various posters of
Wow.
Hammer films.
Yeah.
Yeah. How many
Yeah.
of them are just close-up shots of Christopher Lee?
A lot of them.
A lot of them.
But I mean, if you look right now in a lot of graphic media, if you look at companies here, True Grit, here you go. There's your free plug because I love all those stuff that they do there. That kind of kitschy, you see it kind of in the tiki room stuff that we've seen. The color palettes, the staunch contrast. I mean, that's classic poster making 101.
Yep.
And you can see a lot of it if you're in college. Freshman year, maybe learning what marijuana is. Maybe put a couple of these up on your wall, show people you got some edge. You know what I'm saying?
I like it. For me, it would be more like a Pulp Fiction poster or something. But
What would you have Donnie Darko for Chad?
What? No.
Yeah, Donnie Darko.
All right.
maybe Lord of the Rings, Middle Earth.
No.
Map. Yeah.
Ghostbusters.
Not all those who wandered are lost.
Those fucking basic bitches just ruined everything.
So I do think that I am ready to close this off. So, Brian, do you want to be the guy who does the close off this week?
No, don't put me in that position.
Okay, so any closing remarks you have?
No, I enjoyed it, and actually, for it being my first research, my dab into research, if you will. I don't know how they do that, the dab thing.
I saw a guy who did a lazy dab that turned into doing a Hitler salute.
Whoa.
It was very awkward.
I didn't do the Hitler salute for you guys listening, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. Actually, so
you ready for the next one?
Well,
next week,
give me a few, and then I'll do another. So, as I myself feel like I hammered through this pretty quickly, but yeah, I'll next time around. Jake's over there kind of grinning, like, dude, we gave you like 5 months.
Make sure to tune in for Brian's next episode, The Horrors of the Bible, which he will read from beginning to end in research.
No, I will not. So yeah, I think it's time to end it, right?
Awesome. So as always, be sure to reach out to us. Let us know that you like the show, hate the show, want us to change the show, go back to just doing movie reviews because we're like every other basic bitch in the world. If you can, please rate, review, subscribe, giving those little 5-star reviews, thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever the hell you got to do. It helps us a lot in terms of being found. I have looked at so much analytical data when it comes to YouTube and other streaming devices that basically even me begging to someone and typing our name of our show into their search browser is not enough to get them listening. So we need you to grow and justify us spending way too much time researching things that are 50 years old. So for my... Wait, no, you say.
Yeah, well, if you ain't watching them dying, you ain't really trying.
Enjoy killing time. Until next week.
And for all the dildos around me at this table, Jim's here. He kept his mouth shut this whole damn time. He's tapping his microphone that's not plugged in. My name is Jake, reminding you to go out there and do something you love. And remember that all work and no power play makes Jack a dull boy.